Hello, my name is Mark Ostfeld. I'm the Chief Economist and Global Strategist at ADM Investor Services International. I provide basically overviews of what's going on in the global economy, and obviously renewable energy is a key part of where we go next. I will now ask the other participants to introduce themselves briefly, and then we can get into the conversation.
Perfect. If I can go first, then
Yep.
My name is Bharadwaj Kumamuru. I'm the Executive Director of the World Bioenergy Association, basically a NGO based in Stockholm with a mission to promote sustainable development of bioenergy around the world. So happy to be part of this panel and looking forward to a very interesting discussion.
And my name is Nikki Dagard. I am the CEO of Disruptive Biotrading, which is a young startup company that's 16 months old, based in Aarhus, Denmark. And we buy and trade industrial byproducts and different waste streams from production across Europe. And primarily it goes to Scandinavian biogas or European biodiesel. And very much looking forward to this discussion and happy that I was invited to be here.
Okay, I think what sort of a good place to start is just sort of your individual impressions about the biofuels and biodiesel, biomass markets are. There's so many of them, and they're at very different stages of development. And just give your thoughts on that. In terms of what people need to understand about where we stand in different parts of the world, above all Europe.
Adira, you want to go first?
Okay, yeah, that's true. I mean, that's the complexity of that sector. It's not one fuel or one technology or one market. It's a combination of a variety of feedstocks, of course, predominantly forestry based, and then a combination of production pathways, right from gasification, fermentation, acidification, and so on, produce a variety of end products. So it's a mixed bag. It's complex, but it's also the advantages that it's versatile, that it can meet the demands of all end-use sectors, which is not the case with other technologies, for example, with other renewable energy technologies. So if we, one way of categorizing would be in terms of solid, liquid, and gaseous biomass. So for example, if you look at solid biomass, of course, almost 50% of all energy we get from biomass is in the form of traditional biomass use, as we most of us know, in terms of use of fuel wood and charcoal and freestone cook stoves and so on. So that's one, what we call traditional use of bioenergy, which is a big part of the use right now in African countries and in Asian countries. And there's a consensus that it has to move from this traditional use to modern forms of energy within the next 10 years because of its various impacts, health and environment and so on. And then the other part is, of course, these modern forms of solid biomass, whether it's wood chips and wood pellets, and we see that tremendous growth, double-digit growth annually among these modern solid biomass feedstock, mainly driven, of course, by the European Union demand, but we see a lot of demand, say, in Southeast Asian countries and also East Asian countries like Japan and South Korea recently, all policy-driven mainly. So that's one part. Then you've got the liquid biofuels, which are about, say, 3 to 5% of all bioenergy. There you've got bioethanol, biodiesel mainly in the European Union, but also bioethanol mainly in the US and Brazil, which have made a big contribution in decarbonizing the transport sector. When I say big, it's about 3% of the overall transport mix. So there's still a long way to go, but they're quite mature, quite well developed. As an anecdote, I think sugarcane is the largest energy source in Brazil because it's not just for ethanol production, but also bioelectricity production. So it's a big chunk of the energy mix of a particular country, for example. So again, there are emerging technologies with biofuels also, whether it's say hydrogenated vegetable oil and renewable diesel, which is, for example, quite prominent in the Nordic markets recently. Whereas say technologies such as cellulosic ethanol are still a long way to go to be commercially viable because of various challenges. Then finally, of course, biogas, again, a big part of the bioenergy mix, and development has varied depending on the region. Most of it is in the form of anaerobic digestion. There's not much gasification. I think there's a facility in Sweden which had to close down because of some technical challenges, but the anaerobic digestion now also has a big prominent role. We actually had an event a couple of days back on biomethane. If I remember it right, the International Energy Agency says that we need to increase biomethane production by 27 times in the next 10 to 20 years, which is a big growth. So again, a different level of commercialization of different technologies and different feedstock. But the key point here is that we need all these technologies. We need all these pathways because the challenge of decarbonizing the energy system is immense, and it's not possible for one technology or one feedstock to do that. So yeah, that's where kind of a quick overview of the situation. Happy to contribute a bit later.
Martin, want me to jump in here and talk about my experience with Denmark? Yes,
yep.
I'll assume it. So I guess I will say what I experienced in Denmark here in biomass and sustainable energy sources. And basically, I 28th my volume in disrupted since I started here. And why did I do that? Well, maybe I was lucky, maybe I was clever, but for sure there is an extremely high demand here in Denmark, as my government put a lot of money into Danish biogas. And if you think biogas in your country and you think Danish biogas, it's nothing alike. Okay, we have built extremely large industrial facilities that require thousands and thousands of tons per month of different biomass. So I'm mainly focused on liquids, shall we say. Now, as an industry, Danish biogas used to import or buy around 400,000 tons of glycerin. But since COVID, all the glycerin now primarily goes to Asia or European refining. So that raw material commodity basically left my domestic market, which means that me as a trader, I have to be innovative, and I have to go and travel and meet production facilities across Europe. So all the subsidies are now products such as soap stock, fatty acids, sludge. Grease trap is a commodity that springs to mind that is currently a commodity or product that for many companies is a minus. It's a cost. However, it's something that does produce gas and is a renewable. So as a trader, I'm trying to be very much innovative and speak a lot and travel around and share knowledge, because we have much opportunity here in the world, and we are not taking full advantage as of yet. And I'm also involved in what I call a biopellet residue project, because on a personal level, I do believe we need to move away from wood pellets. I know that wood chips can be sustainable, but I also know that wood pellets, especially in Denmark, we had a situation where a heating plant bought 4,000 tons of wood pellets in Brazil. Now, should we be buying wood pellets in Brazil, sail them to Denmark so we can make heating here? Now, is that green? For me personally, I don't think so. Was it good business? Probably it was. Was it good for the image? It certainly was not. And I also know that the politicians in the Baltics have complained to the Danish government that, should we be chopping down the forest so we can have green energy here in Denmark? I'm not so sure. So I think from EU, we need to have more collaborations, more discussion about what side streams are there, what are we not utilizing yet. Can we make another type of biopellet from, let's say, olive waste, rapeseed cakes that may not be suitable for feed? I mean, there is much potential here, but we need to be sharing more, and we need to think creatively, and we need to channel some of these EU funds into the right directions. And with that, I mean, for entrepreneurs, people who are on the ground, people who are trying things, and maybe a little bit less for consultants, which is also a challenge here, especially in my part of the world.
You've raised quite a number of points there, which I think probably need a bit of deeper discussion. I think perhaps actually starting off with this whole picture of, you hint basically there isn't a lot of collaboration going on in the EU, and that different countries are in different places, and what needs to be done to start moving that on. I don't know who wants to go first with that, but it seems to be a very important point.
You can answer that from Danish biogas, because probably also not many people know that Danish biogas gets subsidies from the government. Now, that helps my business case, my company tremendously, but it's not a fair playing field. It's not fair that Danish biogas gets 40 cents euros per cubic meters of methane as a subsidies, when a French biogas plants get maybe 32 cents for their biogas. I mean, how can they compete? You know, and what does that mean? Well, that means that a lot of biomass raw materials obviously comes here to Denmark, but now we are moving energy from, I don't know, south of France, where I'm buying products, to Denmark. Well, should we be doing that? I mean, we breathe the same air, you know. I believe that the biomass should be used where the biomass is. And I think that means that there should be something from EU that, honestly, what we do in Denmark is great, that they give subsidies because we're pushing on technology. We're at the forefront. But that also means that my clients are not for buying and making a lot of money. But, you know, from a green, sustainable point of view, it's not, it's a double-edged sword, as the title says, and I strongly believe that something should be done on this. I mean, it wouldn't be good for my business, but really, I have a sustainable green bio trading company, and I believe we need to be thinking in other ways.
Raj?
Yeah, I mean, we've touched upon quite a few topics here, which I feel might not be enough for the 40 minutes we have. But here are a couple of points. Number one, completely also support that local use should be promoted. There is biomass available in various forms in every country, whether it's in terms of forestry, harvesting residues, processing residues, or agro residues, which seem to be quite a few important focus in many other parts of the world. But the key point here is that, and I also agree, there's a lack of harmony, there's a lack of consistency among different countries and different national policies, which in some cases disincentivizes the use for some technologies or some feedstock over the others. So I agree that we need to have a bit more harmony among all whether it's in the European Union, that could be a good start. But at the same time, it's also important that not all say countries have the amount of feedstock or the amount of technology, commercial technology available to actually utilize it in an efficient way. So sometimes there is a bit of trade, which is also important among different countries of feedstock. And yeah, in terms of the image, it might not be good, but when we talk about sustainability, as long as if you look on a life cycle basis, if you look on a life cycle assessment of any particular feedstock or pathways, if it has or reduces emissions compared to the current situation, I think that's fine. So in many cases, importing, this is usually the case, importing US food pellets to the EU on an image level might not look good, but on a sustainability level, in terms of emissions, it's quite lower compared to the use of for example, coal, which it's replacing. So a certain level of trade based on strict sustainability criteria, not just in terms of emissions also, but of course in terms of sustainable sourcing of feedstock, management of forests, and so on. As long as these criteria are maintained, are there too, which of course is not to say that all biomass is good. There are also bad practices of bioenergy, which is shouldn't be promoted, but certain amount of trade should be promoted to ensure that some countries can meet some of those ambitious targets. Again, not every country has ambition, there are certain countries who are more ambitious than the others for various reasons. So that doesn't, we shouldn't restrict that ambition to become a reality as well. And also, again, collaboration is quite critical. So when we start talking about, say, the use of wood, for example, in the forest in the EU, got to collaborate with other EU nations, with not just energy companies, with forestry owners, with landowners, with academia, not just within the European Union, but where, for example, it comes from, say, Brazil. We've got to collaborate with Brazil, got to discuss with them what sort of sustainability criteria there exist, and how can we ensure that strict criteria is followed. And so collaboration, I absolutely agree that we need more collaboration, but at the same time, we've got to promote all technologies and all solutions. And just as a key final point, when we talk of wood pellets, there are many, I think, huge number of certification schemes. Whether it's in terms of certifying the quality of pellets or whether it's in certifying the sourcing of pellets. I can point out to SBP, the Sustainable Biomass Partnership. There's independent audits, verification, annual verification, and so on. And I think SBP certifies about 15 million tons or so of pellets out of the 35-40 or so which is currently produced. So it's not all rosy, but we are on the way, we are on the path, and sustainability has to play a critical role in that, and there's already a big part being played by these schemes to ensure that we use only sustainable bioenergy, and everybody, at least in the industry, wants to promote that. Sorry for the long response, but yeah, that's a feeling.
No, that's good, because it's obviously, it's a complex topic. I was just thinking in terms of this waste, that so much of this comes from what would be waste from another product. Is there, should there be more focus on those industries which don't need basically to recycle their waste, because a lot of people recycle their waste because they need to improve their profit margins, and they can't just afford to throw it away, whereas other industries basically make such good profits on the primary product that they don't really care what happens to the waste. I mean, where are the challenges there, in terms of how do you get a more unified picture?
Maybe I can start by answering that. I don't know if my echo is gone, but I will try and speak slowly. Maybe it's less. Incentives. I believe that we should have a incentive scheme across the board in EU, where I know many companies are trying to be more green, more sustainable. But why don't we put some incentives in place, so when they have different types of waste that comes to waste codes, instead of it just going away, why don't they get some kind of bonus, some kind of financial benefits here for trying to do something different? Because what happens now with waste is that somebody just comes and removes it, right? As whatever they have done for the last 2, 3, 10 years, right? Because companies are obviously thinking about the bottom line and what goes out in the front, and what goes out in the back, it kind of just has to go away. And because you are so busy on your front or your internal organization and making money, that it kind of, there isn't enough time or energy to focus on the back. It is slowly changing, of course, but we could incentivize these companies to say, look, if you don't change, or if you have 5,000 tons of different types of waste per year, well, that waste needs to be reused, and we understand that now it's just being removed, but you can get whatever the financial benefits could be from this. Because I go and meet all kinds of production plants in Poland, Germany, Holland, and there is an incredible amount of waste that has an incredible amount of energy inside of it. And when I show up and I tell these companies, I'm here to buy, they are surprised, because they say, but Nikki, you cannot pay money for this. It has no value. But it does. Technology has advanced so much that we can turn waste into renewable energy sources, but the knowledge is not there, or the willingness now to look at your waste streams are not there because there isn't this financial incentive. So if EU or people here like Bajava could push in this kind of direction, I think that would be extremely beneficial for all of us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, first of all, of course, when we talk of waste and residues, of course, there's quite a few things here itself, and I mean, whether it's municipal solid waste or waste or residues from, for example, forestry harvesting practices or wood processing industries, or whether it's waste. There are various, of course, aspects to that. There are in this debate, of course, there's one key point to note is that biomass for energy, it's very hard to compete with biomass for other uses. And when we talk of wood pellets, when we talk of wood chips, they predominantly come from the harvesting and processing residues, predominantly, mainly because it's absolutely too expensive for the energy companies to actually use whole trees. It just doesn't make sense for them because the sawmilling or the paper milling industry, they pay a lot more. Just in terms of pure economic sense, it just doesn't, yeah, it's not worth to use whole trees. So then you've got these byproducts and residues, which typically go into landfill or wasted on site. So that's kind of in the forestry industry and so on. So there is an incentive to actually use those residues, resources which are currently underutilized, which don't have a cost. But of course, once you start using that, as Nikki pointed out, there will be a value to it. You know, waste is not waste all the time. So once you have a market, once you start developing that, they will slowly have a price on that. But there are, of course, incentives at least the level to utilize bioenergy waste feedstock resources for energy to meet, for example, the RED targets. So it's happening, but of course, there's got to be not just incentive on for example, I can take a example for in the biogas industry, for example. So it's not just incentive to utilize waste as feedstock, but also the end products, the byproducts which are produced in the production pathway have also to be incentivized to make sure that there is a good business economic sense to actually build those facilities. Because the good thing about bioenergy is that it's not just energy. When you talk about ethanol, produce also, for example, DDGS, you also produce carbon dioxide, which is utilized for, say, beverage industry. If you talk about biogas, you produce fertilizers, biofertilizers, which can replace natural fertilizers, which don't have a value right now, and which is hard to compete with actual natural fertilizers, which are produced, of course, from natural gas right now. So it's not just that there should be incentives to utilize the resources as a feedstock, but all those byproducts which are produced on the pathway to bioenergy also have got to be incentivized to ensure that they are also utilized, and that makes an economic sense to actually build facilities, because bioenergy is not just energy, it has impacts all over. So there is again, it of course depends on technologies, depends on feedstocks, but I think it's a key point is that there should be more incentives to and it's not talking about subsidies or distorting the field, because these have to compete with fossil fuels, which have been heavily subsidized for many years and still are. So if you want to make it a bit more level playing field for bioenergy to compete, either provide incentives for bioenergy to compete or reduce the incentives which the current energy fuels enjoy, so that they can at least compete at a reasonable level, which is happening in different parts of the world. But if you want to have bioenergy make a contribution that is needed, then we need a bit more push from the policymakers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the point you made there about the deployment, the areas of deployment is an important one. It's not particularly good for producing just plain energy, but it is actually very useful in other areas. And perhaps you could highlight, both of you, other areas where the deployment of all this all the biofuels and biomass is most applicable, and really could be very useful.
I can speak briefly on some, excuse me, some experience that I know currently. Share some market trade intel that I know from Spain. Everybody should know that I have a lot of olive oil production, and from there is a quite substantial amount of biomass waste. And if you search for olive oil biomass, the internet will spit out tons of research paper, because the EU have been trying to help these industries for a long time to try and make them more sustainable. And well, it used to be, they used to contact me to see if we could use this in Scandinavia, and it can be used for bioheating from time to time. But lately they stopped calling. They stopped calling because I believe they have found a use case domestically in Spain and also in the south. Our technology in regards to bioheating has advanced itself. And that is something I think needs to be shared more. Which technologies are growing, which one of them are ready now to turn into research cases, technology case, into actually making a green sustainable energy. I mean, so that is one case that is there. I don't know if I went off on a tangent again.
Welcome, Raman. Glad you could join us. Your speaker's off.
Good afternoon, everybody. We had a technical issues with the link to connect, not as a part of the audience, but the speaker. And so finally, I succeeded to connect. Very sorry for joining a session a bit late, but would there be a chance to contribute? I am ready.
Yes. Within this, we've been discussing about this sort of whole area of deployment, and I know when we were speaking before the conference, you were emphasizing just how differentiated, particularly the use of things like bioethanol are, and how particularly national regimes are taking so much time sometimes to just put the legislation in place. Perhaps you could give us some of your thoughts on that front, and also about how disruptive the pandemic has been in this area.
Yes, especially in Central European countries situated or in the biorefineries situated far from a seaport. So they suffered much. They could not deliver fast oil for processing for months. And so that was the issue, for instance, in Poland and some other countries. And for biorefineries having access to the ports, it was not an issue. And they continuously received supplies of biomass, and they had access to diverse sources of biomass. So the COVID pandemics up to now had, even through the summer months, as to my knowledge, it had an impact on sourcing. And yes, in terms, very briefly, in terms of biofuel mandates and green targets, it seems that what has been said, it's going to be achieved in Scandinavia for sure, within the time frame of the next 15 years, perhaps 20 years, but not even in the rest of Europe. And again, if we move to North America, then California will be far beyond others. In green targets, whatever decision will be made by Congress, and whatever decisions and subsidies will be offered, or it's a still question what will be approved by the Congress of Biden's proposal. If we talk about biofuels and biomass, yes. So that's my key point.
Okay. So one thing which seems to come quite clearly through is that governments need to get a lot more involved in this. I suppose, how does the industry incentivize governments to get on with things? I think this applies across the board. I don't know.
So what's essential that the government and legislative bodies, they talk to the producers, not only to the associations, national or European Association of biofuel industry, but they have some work on field, talk to producers, biorefiners, to the suppliers of renewable feedstocks, to make sure that green targets are realistic, and subsidies. If we talk about the most advanced processing, can be commercialized, a kind of technologies like pyrolysis process. So it's already commercialized in Scandinavia, but not beyond that, not beyond.
So there's quite a lot of learning experience. There was I think it might have been you, Nikki, who mentioned this, but one of the experiences in America that I know about in America in terms of manufacturing is what the shale oil revolution did was revitalize a lot of small American manufacturing, because they could access cheap energy locally as opposed to from externally. To what extent does the biomass industry also need to think about maybe having the technology to process, particularly you were talking about people's waste, and that they can't be. What if one of the key developments would be to people to be able to process biofuels on their own, within their own factories for deployment, and therefore get over part of that problem of the transporting of the biomass?
That's a good question. Well, it again it depends on willingness of biorefiners to invest in that full scale production facilities, collectors, but again, COVID had shown that if we have widespread lockdown in Europe and sources of vast oil locked inland, then and not only sources, but also transportation limited to some extent. So I doubt it can help much. So collectors, they were quite functioning in ports like Antwerp or elsewhere, but if inland sourcing is low, so then there were issues for months, as I said, and so we can hardly estimate that this very diverse supply chain may solve that problem as a COVID for biorefiners. But we should look rather at a perspective to have legislation, subsidies in place timely, that will allow new technologies, more advanced, to be commercialized. And that will have an effect if biorefiners can choose what kind of technology they can use to produce one or other product. And then any extensive crisis will have a lesser impact.
I'll pass that over to you, Nikki, and then after Bharadwaj.
I'm thinking more about solutions here, and back to my Danish root and how we have built a incredible huge industrial biogas plants for the commercialization of this and for the business case. But why go big if we can go small? Why not have you can now, I know companies are trying to make miniature biogas plants or bioheating plants that can fit in a 20-foot container. Why shouldn't I don't know, crushing mill in Germany or the UK or France, why shouldn't they have a miniature biogas plant on their side, and they can then use their own byproducts and their own waste stream to make their own energy that they consume? I mean, then we are not moving, you know, things across Europe or the globe, and why not incentivize that? And also before was mentioned something about the money spent from governments here. Just to say that the Danish government has granted around 100 million euros for, let's say, green tech funding projects. Now, is that a lot or is that a little? Well, at the height of the pandemic, on one Friday, we spent 20 million euros on testing. So, you know, where is that a lot of money than 100 million euros if we can spend 20 million euros in a day on testing for COVID? I don't know. I'm not going to be the judge of that, but I definitely do believe that a smaller biogas plant, also for, we talked the other day, what about Africa? What about the third world? I mean, are they ready yet? Maybe not. As I like to say in Africa, food in the belly, money in the pocket. They want to reach that stage. Okay, sustainable. It can be a topic, but should they build a huge factories? Is that most suitable solution for them? Why not start up small scale, small plants with local biomass that are plenty of? Technology is advancing that they can use all kinds of different raw materials as biodiesel evolve, that is turning into more and more plants are producing HBO and so on. So I think smaller is better than bigger for just for a green sustainable energy point of view.
Bharadwaj?
Yeah, the smaller looks better, of course, but I think considering the challenge that we have, the scale up that we need for bioenergy, we do need transformations at a larger level in gigawatts, not kilowatts, for example. I lost that thread a bit here, but just the overall theme of what can governments do in sort of interventions in helping promote bioenergy. We just have a couple of points. Number one, of course, the mandates should be higher, as St. Ramons pointed out. For example, in transport biofuels, the transport target was 10% 2020. Sweden already has, I think, 27 or 28%. So some are overachieving, some are underachieving. But I think the ambition mandates should be higher. And to support those mandates, what we try to promote is you have to be technology neutral. Don't try to push one technology over the other. Don't try to say electricity is better than bioheating. Try to be technology neutral. Of course, some technologies do need some support. I think pyrolysis oil is a good example. There are good commercial facilities available, but there are certain technologies, say cellulosic ethanol and so on, who still need some investment support. They're not at the same level as say sugarcane ethanol or corn ethanol or rapeseed biodiesel. So some, of course, do need some support. In that sense, that's okay. But let the market decide which technology it needs, and also make sure that everything is underpinned in sustainability. That you've got to have strict criteria and strict implementation of the criteria to ensure that all technologies are promoted equally, but that's usually not the case sometimes in the EU. And you mentioned that EU has to be more involved. Maybe sometimes they have to be less involved as well. And also that when they get involved, try to make sure that you involve for a longer duration. There's a lot of some policies. There's a lot of flip-flops we see, and considering that the investments usually take sometimes in some technologies 5 to 10 years or so to materialize. The policies. Don't try to switch. And I can take an example of liquid biofuels and bioethanol, where food-based biofuels were part of the mix until 2020, but now they plan to reduce that and try to promote advanced biofuels. But at the same time, there's still some challenges for advanced biofuels to meet. So try to be technology neutral, try to be stable in your policies. And of course, Nikki pointed out about Africa and in Asia, this use of traditional biomass, which is absolutely critical because it's not just an energy issue. It's an issue of health. It's an issue of deforestation, and this has to change. There's no other alternative. What will fill that gap is a question. Will that be filled by LPG and natural gas, which seems to be the case in many regions right now? Or will it be locally utilized biomass resources to meet those needs for cooking and heating and so on? So I think it's something to keep a track of, keep an eye on, and try to push for more modern forms of bioenergy and renewables. But that transition has to happen, and it will happen. But you see what will make that will take that role. So yeah, that's kind of overview of what the governments can do or shouldn't do.
Okay, sadly, because I think there's plenty more we could talk about, but sadly our allotted time has come to an end. So I thank you all, Nikki, Bharadwaj, Raman, for joining the discussion, and I hope it's provided some interesting ideas to a lot of other people. And I will have to basically close it here, and thank you all.
Well, I had one last remark, if you allow less than a minute, maybe.
Okay.
So in 5 years' time, I think most of people should pay attention on HVO market, higher treated vegetable oil. So this market will probably double within the perspective of next 5 years, and there is still a lot of demand to come in Europe, and also bioethanol, also synthetic bioethanol in the most developed countries. So that's another probably the most known currently source of supply in terms of biofuel. The demand is expected to grow fastly and maybe double as well as a drop-in component to gasoline.
Okay, right. And with that, I think we shall just have to close. Thank you all again, and look forward to keeping in touch with all of you.